Alright, 2021 has come and gone, which means it's time for the annual tradition of best of and worst of movies of the year. Even though this is my first year on YouTube, it's time for my first annual list of best of and worst of movies of the year, 2021 edition. And when I make a list like this, obviously I haven't seen every movie of 2021 because that's literally impossible. So this is just based on the experiences I had personally.
You know, that's just like your opinion, man.
Everyone's gonna be different because it's subjective. This is probably the most subjective list you can make. So I decided to break this up into two categories. My next video coming out is gonna be the top 10 best / pleasantly surprising movies of the year. But today we are gonna focus on the 10 worst / disappointing movies.
Not quite my tempo.
And when we start this list at the bottom, like the 10, 9, 8, these are movies that I still enjoyed, but they didn't quite live up to the expectations I had in my head. Middle of this list is gonna be a combination of movies that disappointed me, but also just weren't very good. And then the top of the list is reserved for movies that are just flat out bad.
You stink.
Alright, starting my list off at number 10 is gonna be a pick that is sure to upset some people, and that is Pig. And the worst part of this ranking is I unironically love Nicolas Cage. For every overacted performance we get and questionable script he accepts at best. We also get movies like Con Air, Gone in 60 Seconds, Face Off, The Family Man. So when I saw a movie with him as our lead, and a movie that was getting rave reviews, I was insanely excited to see this. But the longer I watched this movie, the more I kept asking myself, like, when is something gonna happen? A movie's supposed to have, like, an inciting incident and a climax, right?
That is correct.
Nothing compelling ever happens. And before people start saying, you just can't appreciate this type of movie, I fully appreciate slower paced, artistic type of films. The Road with Viggo Mortensen is on my list of favorite movies of all time. But Pig was just really boring, and to me it didn't tell a very cohesive story either. One moment you have him going into this underground fight club, and then the next thing you know, the big finish here is he cooks a meal? As far as the characters go, there was no one here that really gave a notable or memorable performance. Like, I literally just watched this a few months ago, and I can only remember two characters. You have Nick Cage's character, and then you have his sidekick, or whatever you want to call him, Amir. And he really didn't do anything for me at all. Like, he wasn't the worst part of the movie, but he also didn't really bring anything to it either. The story just didn't pull me in, the writing and the characters didn't do anything for me, and in a movie I desperately wanted to love, I just didn't.
Who has my pig?
Alright, now next up at number 9 is gonna be another potentially upsetting pick, Godzilla vs. Kong. Now before I go forward, I don't consider this a bad movie whatsoever. This falls more on the side of a disappointment for me, and in its defense, every time we have the two titular characters facing off, whether it's fighting each other or teaming up to take on Mechagodzilla, that's all really good stuff, no issues there. My issues with this movie fall, well, everywhere else. Between the conspiracy theorist Bernie and the girl's best friend Josh, that were both meant to be like the comedic relief in this movie, I don't think I laughed even once. Which wouldn't be a big deal if they were just trying for the occasional joke, but this script focused so much on putting these jokes in that when they don't land, it really takes away from the experience. It also didn't make a lot of sense to me that this little girl Madison knew more about Apex than, you know, the cybernetics technician that dedicated his entire life to working for and researching them. That one was a little hard to believe. Just every scene involving these human characters, other than Eileen and her daughter's connection with King Kong, just really took away from the experience that people signed up for here. And that's to watch these two giant-ass monsters fight each other. I'm just a big fan of kaiju films, and that's all I need in a movie like this. While I fully understand you need to have these human characters, to me, when you have them getting into their backstories and just having all these jokes that constantly swing and miss, That's just taking time away from what we all came here for, and that's Godzilla vs. Kong. So overall, not a bad movie by any measure, just a little disappointing to me. But that final scene with Godzilla and King Kong teaming up to fight Mechagodzilla, that was good stuff. Alright, next up at number 8 is gonna be The Many Saints of Newark. And for anybody that doesn't know me, I am a big Breaking Bad guy.
You're goddamn right.
And I'm also a big Sopranos fan. And the reason I bring both of these up is this movie gave me a lot of the same feelings I had towards El Camino. While it's a perfectly fine movie on its own, it definitely didn't give me those same feelings that I got from the respective shows. Like, if I hadn't heard any of these characters' names, I would have never guessed that this is tied into the Sopranos universe. And while I do enjoy the scenes we get with the late James Gandolfini's son Michael playing a young Tony Soprano, everything else in here just really felt like an average, maybe even below average gangster movie. And for this being marketed as the Tony Soprano origin story, we really just didn't get enough scenes with him. I especially wanted to see more moments between him and Dickie Moltisanti, which if you watch the show was like his mentor. And knowing that this was a prequel, I was really excited to get some more backstory between these characters and see how we got where we did going into The Sopranos. But really all it did was raise more questions than it answered. One of my biggest gripes with this movie is that we know that Junior and Dickie had a falling out in the Sopranos universe, but after all these years, all they could really come up with was that Dickie laughed at Junior when he tripped, so he put a hit out for him. Really? That was the best you could do. The movie's definitely not what I would consider to be bad, and like El Camino, maybe it was just never gonna live up to the hype I had in my head, but overall it just left me a little disappointed and ultimately wanting more. So, The Many Saints of Newark, number 8.
What'd you say?
Alright, next up at number 7 is gonna be Venom, Let There Be Carnage. This one was a pretty massive disappointment for me. I had every reason to believe that it was gonna be significantly better than the first Venom, which I wasn't a huge fan of, but against all odds, I don't know if it is. Maybe marginally. First and foremost, this was a movie that suffered from not having an R rating. This is an area I think both of these movies were really hurt by. But the first one, you could probably get away with a PG-13. When you bring Cletus Cassidy into the fold, you need that hard R. And this movie truly suffers because of that. I love Woody Harrelson as an actor, but this character just didn't work for me. Like the way he was presented, I never bought him as a true psychopath. To me, he just seemed like this awkward loner looking for friendship. And I really thought we were gonna spend a good amount of this runtime looking into Cletus's background and his past. But they instead decided to focus more on Venom and Eddie fighting like an old married couple. And then you have Venom like separating with Eddie to go do his own thing. Oh boy, and that scene when he's at the rave up on the stage talking. I know these movies are goofy and that's what they're going for, but this made me physically cringe. And they tried to make Dr. Dan like this comedic relief character in a movie that didn't need it because every character's making jokes like literally every 5 seconds. And the only way I can describe it with his humor is it felt like they were trying to give him a lot of these little quips, similar to how you see in MCU movies. But that type of humor is very hard to pull off. It just didn't work here for me. But as much as I hated Dr. Dan,
No one likes you, Dan!
there's one character I hated even more, and that was Cletus's love interest, Shriek. She wasn't given much to do, and I don't necessarily fault Naomi Harris, but every line she's given is just so over the top. It was really kind of hard to watch. And on top of all that, a criticism I have for both of these Venom movies is that Tom Hardy's portrayal of the character Eddie Brock is just so goddamn weird. Every time I talk about this, I can never quite put my finger on it, but the way he's always twitching and fidgeting and profusely sweating, I don't know, it just always throws me off. But hands down, the biggest disappointment with this movie is how little time we got with Carnage. Like with them not exploring his backstory very much, I really figured he would be a threat going forward in this universe. But he's literally killed off at the end of this first movie. That just seems like a really bad decision to me. He could have been a looming presence for Venom Who knows, maybe even for one of the Spider-Men going forward, and they just killed him. So overall, there was a few things I liked about the movie, but there was a lot more that really didn't work for me. So, number 7 is gonna be Venom, Let There Be Carnage.
Fuck this guy!
Alright, this is gonna be tough, because this is flat out my biggest disappointment of the year. So coming in at number 6 is gonna be Halloween Kills. Now I love this franchise. The original Halloween is still my favorite horror movie of all time, and Halloween 2018 breathed some much needed new life into this franchise after we had got quite a few forgettable movies in a row.
Look at me!
So I was insanely excited to see the follow-up with Halloween Kills. In my mind, I'm thinking, so we're gonna get the characters we got from 2018, just with more brutality and creative kills? Perfect. You're telling me this movie starts with a 1978 flashback featuring Dr. Sam Loomis? There's no way they can fuck this up. And then the rest of the movie happened. A movie that took runtime away from the characters we love to insert this forced message about the dangers of mob mentality. And it just felt so out of place in this franchise. A movie that features some of the dumbest characters ever put onto screen.
Huh. I expected the Rocky Mountains to be a little rockier than this.
Still.
No way! That's great!
Just take all these horror tropes from every movie and combine them, and that's these characters. They're always splitting up, they're missing shots from point blank range, they constantly have Michael down, and instead of decapitating this fucker, they just like stand there and let him recover. It's infuriating. I'm surprised we didn't have more people tripping over nothing. But on top of all these shitty characters, I don't remember the last time I hated a single character more than Tommy Doyle. Like, it got to the point where I was asking, am I supposed to be sad that Tommy just got killed? Because in my mind, I'm like, fuck yeah, Michael. And speaking of Michael, multiple times throughout this movie, I didn't get the sense that I was watching Michael Myers, and it didn't even feel like a Halloween movie. Like, he's taking out 6, 8, 10 people at a time. That's not who Michael Myers is. If you watch these movies, he stalks his prey one by one, he takes them out stealthily, he doesn't fight crowds of 10 people. This felt more like John Wick than it did Halloween. So that royally pissed me off. But for a few points of redemption, just like with Godzilla vs. Kong, at least they got the title right. The kills here are pretty creative and brutal as hell. They were a lot of fun to watch. I loved watching Big John and Little John on the screen together. They had some really good chemistry. And finally, I thought Judy Greer's character, Karen, was a lot better in this movie. I didn't really like her in Halloween 2018, but she was significantly better. But overall, this movie was just not what I was expecting at all. I'm hoping it works better as the middle part of a trilogy after we see Halloween Ends. But let's just say Halloween Ends has a lot of work to do to make up for this.
That we have a hell of a lot of work to do around here.
Alright, next up at number 5 is gonna be Matrix Resurrections. And now we're starting to get into that territory of worst of 2021. But these next few movies, I still had some level of expectations that were not met. So this is still worse and disappointing, but starting to lean a little more on the worst side. Now, as soon as this movie was announced, I was pretty skeptical. I've always said, even before those terrible early 2000 sequels came out, that The Matrix should be a standalone film. It tells a complete story, a complete hero's journey of Neo. And while the original will always be considered a classic and one of my favorite sci-fi action type movies, the rest of these movies have hurt its legacy a little bit. And to get the obvious right out of the way, not having Lawrence Fishburne and Hugo Weaving return for this movie really hurt. Like, they have these characters that are clearly trying to be their replacements, but it just kept reminding me that we are getting worse versions of these characters I love so much. To me, I think it would have been better to make some new characters, not even include these two, because it's just reminding audiences, you're not Morpheus, you're not Agent Smith. It was a strange decision to me. As far as the story goes, this is a movie that felt like it was very confused tonally speaking. Like, it couldn't decide if it wanted to be this modern meta, subvert your expectations type of thing, or if it wanted to rehash the original Matrix. So much to the point where the first half of this movie, minus those coffee house scenes, almost felt like a shot-for-shot remake of the original Matrix, but a lesser version of that. The writing just really threw me off here. I feel like these writers thought they were being more clever and cute than what they actually pulled off on screen. Like Keanu Reeves' character created this video game, The Matrix.
My name is Neo.
So they make all these jokes about his video game when they really apply to the older movies. And I just couldn't help but thinking, you're trying way too hard here. And a complaint I've had about every sequel in this franchise, another reason I think they should have kept this one movie, is the agents just don't feel like a threat here. Every time there's agents around, all Neo has to do is just like yell and push them away. Everything with Neo and Trinity was pretty good. It was great seeing them reform that relationship. And I did like the addition of Bugs. But everything else in this movie, the story didn't work for me. The action scenes definitely felt like a lesser version of The Matrix and The Matrix Reloaded. This was a bad and disappointing movie.
Uh-oh. No. No, 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 no.
Next up at number 4 is gonna be Resident Evil: Welcome to Raccoon City. Now, I love Resident Evil. It's my favorite video game franchise of all time. Hell, I recently made 2 videos ranking all of the Resident Evil games. Card. So when I heard that there was a new movie coming out that was gonna be more faithful to the story, as opposed to those awful Paul W.S. Anderson action movies, I was ecstatic. But this movie sucked. Like, the fact that it even got a theatrical release is mind-blowing to me. It feels like a movie that should have been dropped on one of those free streaming services that nobody uses. It was that bad. First and foremost, my biggest issue, and I think most people's biggest issue with this movie, is there's exactly one good character, and that is of course Robbie Amell playing Chris Redfield. Other than that, every other character felt miscast, poorly acted, or just a combination of the two. And Leon fucking Kennedy, aka the best character in the games, is a moron here. In the game, he's a rookie cop, he's young, he's inexperienced, he's maybe a bit naive, but the way he's written in this movie is pathetic. Like, this guy would never be able to get a job anywhere. He even says in the movie, talking to Claire, "I bet you're wondering why I became a cop." Yeah, I'm wondering that too. Like, this dude knows he's a moron. I think it's legitimately the angriest I got watching any movie in 2021. And on top of Leon, Wesker was awful, Jill didn't feel like Jill, and the writing and dialogue in this movie is just cringe-inducing.
You snooze, you lose.
What?
It's Jill Sandwich now.
The decision to combine the first 2 games into one movie honestly made no sense to me. Like, the one thing this film had going for it was the set design. So why not focus this entire movie on the Spencer Mansion, and then you can make the RPD the sequel? Oh, that's right, because then you couldn't have Claire Redfield be best friends with Lisa Trevor. You know, like they were in the games.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
The CGI is terrible. Like, you know it's bad when the dogs from the Resident Evil movie in 2002 look substantially better than these dogs in 2021. To me, they just got all the little details wrong here, and there are a few scenes that just piss me off because they make no sense. Like when the truck tips over in front of the RPD and that zombie comes screaming on fire into the station, and Leon doesn't hear him because he's wearing those shitty early 90s Sony headphones that we all had. Those aren't noise isolating. They were terrible. And there are so many more issues I have with this movie. But to conclude, Welcome to Raccoon City is awful. It's bad if you're a fan of these games. I imagine it's probably bad if you've never played a Resident Evil game, because it feels like an honest-to-God, terribly acted B-movie. I was definitely the guy in the theater laughing my ass off during these moments that were supposed to be taken seriously. I hated this movie.
Man, that sucks! Why? That sucks, true. I'm gonna talk to some people and straighten this out, man.
Now we're in the top 3, and these are movies that are just awful. I had no level of expectation for any of these 3 movies. They were just the worst experiences I had in 2021. So number 3 is gonna be Old. Now, M. Night Shyamalan is a director that I always root for, because when he makes a good movie, he makes a masterpiece.
I see dead people.
But when he makes a bad movie, well, you get old. A movie with a pretty good premise on the surface. You have people going to this island that rapidly ages them, but then you meet these characters that are not fleshed out whatsoever. They're just these extremely one-dimensional figures with no distinguishing personality traits. It's like the writers were so focused on the premise that they forgot to write compelling characters. And to further drive that point home, the dialogue mixed with the line delivery from these actors is just painful to watch. Also, this doesn't tell a very cohesive story. A lot of times I feel like they just filmed a bunch of scenes and threw them together to make a movie. And that can work in the right context. Check out my review for Licorice Pizza. But in this case, it fell flat. You also have these really strange, questionable scenes, like these two 7-year-olds that rapidly age up into their 20s, and they go into this tent to fool around. And while yes, in this movie they are now in their 20s, it still feels wrong. You have to watch the movie to see what I mean. Not quite sure why they put it in there. And since this is an M. Night Shyamalan movie, of course you have the inevitable third act twist. At this point, I feel like it would be more of a twist if he didn't put a twist in his movie.
He always puts some like awesome twist at the end of his movies to trick the audience.
Oh, yeah, like in The Sixth Sense, you find out that the dude in that hairpiece the whole time, that's Bruce Willis, the whole movie.
But again, to go along with this lack of a cohesive story, this twist doesn't seem to have much connective tissue to what we just spent 90 minutes watching. It felt more like he just wanted to insert a political message into his movie that didn't fit. Overall, I just felt like Old is trying to be this super high concept movie that, in my opinion, fell flat on its face.
What's an M. Night?
Wow, gross.
All right, here we are, the top two, the worst of the worst of 2021. And my runner-up for worst movie of the year is gonna be Space Jam: A New Legacy. Why? Just why?
Why? Why? Why?
Why? What? Why?
Why? Why?
Why?
As soon as I heard about this movie, I knew it sounded like a terrible idea. Was anybody really screaming for a new Space Jam movie? And the worst part is, I've seen LeBron be funny in these little appearances in movies. Like if you've never seen Trainwreck, he's one of the best parts of that. So I thought at least the one thing this movie has going for it is there's no way LeBron is gonna be as bad as Michael Jordan was. But against all odds, he's on the same level of terrible acting here. The ridiculous amount of product placement in this movie just makes it feel like one big advertisement. And then their opponents, the Goon Squad, they suck compared to the Monstars. There's just no competing with those original characters. To me, Space Jam was a movie that was always meant to be a one and done. It doesn't lend itself to a bunch of sequels the way that, say, Toy Story does. It's just a truly unique idea that was a one-time lightning in a bottle. Use it one time, then discard forever.
Yikes.
But there is one movie even worse than Space Jam, and that's gonna be Home Sweet Home Alone. When I started compiling entries for this list, there was never a doubt what my number one was gonna be. This movie was so bad that I made a review for the sole purpose of shitting all over it, just because I thought it would be fun. Which you can see right up here. Somehow Disney thought it was a good idea to say, let's take the original Home Alone movies, but instead of having a kid defend himself against these home invaders, let's have this kid torture these two good people that are just trying to get their property back so they can avoid bankruptcy, and you know, so their children aren't homeless. It's genius. Now, I don't write screenplays, but I would think that if you're making a kid's movie where you want to make the kid a hero, maybe don't make him a little jerk.
Look what you did, you little jerk.
While making the people he's going against sympathetic characters. It's not fun to watch this kid get one over on these people like it was in the original Home Alone movies. You feel bad for this married couple because they're literally just trying to get their property back to save their family, and they're going through hell.
This is not going well!
And while the traps were fun to watch in the early movies, because both they were so intentionally over the top, and these reactions we got from the Wet Bandits, they just feel pretty cruel here. Most notably when Ellie Kemper's character gets her feet set on fire, and then she has all these needles like shot into her face. It's not fun to watch. It feels like we're watching a goddamn Saw movie. This movie just has none of the heart or the charm that you got from Chris Columbus's directing chops. and that great score we got from the legendary John Williams. You have these two good people that are being tortured by this kid that isn't written to be very likable. And on top of that, you have Archie Yates turning in a truly awful performance, which I don't typically like to say about child actors, but the thing is, I've seen this kid act. He was really good in Jojo Rabbit. But I guess that goes to show what a good script versus a bad script can do for an actor.
They don't even know I'm here. They don't even know I'm here.
So overall, this was far and away the worst movie experience I had in 2021. But that's going to do it for my top 10 worst / most disappointing movie experiences in 2021. Let me know down below in the comments what your list looks like, your top 3, your top 5, your top 10. Let me know if there's any on my list that you really disagree with. I'm sure there's going to be a few. And as always, if you enjoyed this, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing right over here so you don't miss any future content. Really helps the channel to grow. And if you want to see some other stuff on my channels, like some reviews, some tier lists, some rankings, you can check a few of those out right over on this end. And until next time, we will see you for my top 10 best movies of 2021.